My name is Josephine Whitmore. To my arrogant stepfather and frightened mother, I'm simply a failure. A 35-year-old unmarried woman hunched over a computer in her childhood bedroom. Invisible. Unremarkable. But what they don't know is that device holds nuclear authorization codes. When my stepfather Malcolm snatched my secure red phone to humiliate me, he made the most catastrophic mistake of his life. I still see his face clearly. That moment when smugness drained completely. When his hands began to shake uncontrollably. When the color left his skin like someone switched off a light. This is the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. You have just severed contact with a senior military commander. Armed police will be at your front door in 90 seconds. He thought he was the king of his kitchen. But he was about to discover that the stepdaughter he'd ridiculed for years was the only person in that room with authority to call off an entire Royal Navy submarine fleet. If you've ever believed you should never underestimate quiet people, because you genuinely don't know what kind of formidable power lies dormant within them, please subscribe to Hidden Family Infidelity and Revenge and hit that like button now. The air in the dining room was suffocating. It tasted of overcooked poultry and something else. Fear. Christmas dinner in our Weybridge home always carried that peculiar tension, that underlying current of unease no amount of festive decoration could mask. The television was blaring. Arsenal FC versus Liverpool in a crucial Boxing Day match. The volume was so high the windows rattled whenever the crowd roared. Malcolm sat at the head of the table like a bloated emperor, his face already flushed from 4 pints of Stella Artois. He was a large man, his shoulders straining against an expensive polo shirt that never quite fitted correctly, his belly announcing itself with absolute confidence. Brilliant play, that. Absolutely brilliant, Malcolm bellowed, slamming his fist onto the mahogany table. Wine glasses trembled. He pointed his fork at my grandfather Arthur, who sat quietly in his wheelchair at the far end. Do you see that pass, Artie? That's what real authority looks like. Not like the soft, namby-pamby nonsense they teach in schools these days. Grandpa Arthur didn't respond. He simply stared at his plate, his hands trembling slightly with advanced Parkinson's disease. I cleared my throat quietly, barely audible beneath the sports commentary. Josephine, Malcolm snapped, his head whipping towards me instantly. Can't you see we're watching the match? Some of us actually appreciate genuine sporting excellence. I looked down at my plate, pushing the dry turkey around with my fork. I'm terribly sorry, Malcolm. His grunt was dismissive as he reached for another beer. Now he stood up, grabbing the electric carving knife. It buzzed to life, that horrible aggressive sound that made everyone flinch. He brandished it like a weapon, pointing it around the table to emphasize his ridiculous authority. Right then, new rule, Malcolm announced loudly, drowning out the television. He grabbed a wicker basket from the worktop and slammed it onto the center of the table. Digital detox zone. I'm absolutely fed up with everyone glued to their screens. Phones in the basket. Right now, my heart seized in my chest. This wasn't about social media. My phone, disguised in a military-grade protective case, was a secure encrypted line linked directly to the Ministry of Defense. As a lieutenant general commanding strategic operations in the Pacific Theater, I was legally required to keep it within arm's reach at all times. Malcolm, I really must keep mine, I said, keeping my voice steady. I'm expecting a work call. It's quite urgent. Malcolm laughed, that harsh barking sound. He leaned across the table, the knife still buzzing. Work call? From whom exactly? Your supervisor at the government data center? Or have you finally started that pyramid scheme? It's genuinely important, I insisted, sliding the phone onto my lap, concealing it beneath my napkin. I could feel the weight of it pressing against my thighs, a weight that represented the lives of thousands. Look at her, Malcolm sneered, addressing the entire table. 35 years old. No husband, no children, no genuine career. Still living like a teenager in her childhood bedroom. You know what they used to call women your age when they weren't married? Spinsters. My knuckles turned white as I gripped the napkin. I wanted to tell him that whilst he was peeling potatoes in military kitchens back in the 80s, I was graduating top of my cohort from Sandhurst. that I was managing Trident submarine deployments, dealing with nuclear deterrence across entire continents. But I couldn't. The classification was beyond top secret. To this family, I had to remain invisible. I looked across the table at my mother. Margaret, though everyone called her Maggie, was picking at her mashed potatoes, her eyes darting between Malcolm and me like a frightened animal. Surely she would say something. She knew I paid the mortgage. She knew I wasn't useless. "Mum," I whispered. Maggie forced a tight, apologetic smile. She reached out and placed a generous slice of turkey onto Malcolm's plate, soothing him like one would a feral dog. "Oh, darling, just leave her alone. You know Josephine has always been a bit slow to flourish. Don't let her spoil your appetite." The air left my lungs in one sharp moment. It wasn't his insults that cut deepest. I'd grown accustomed to those. It was her, my own mother, the woman whose house I'd kept from being repossessed 3 times. She was apologizing for my very existence to keep a bully satisfied. Malcolm smirked, chewing loudly with his mouth open. Damn right. At least someone in this house has respect for the man who keeps this roof over everyone's head. Under the table, the secure phone vibrated against my leg. A specific pattern. Long, short, long. Priority 1 alert. I looked at my mother one final time. She avoided my gaze completely, focusing intently on pouring gravy, absolutely terrified that if she met my eyes, her carefully constructed delusion would shatter. That look of pathetic surrender was identical to the one she'd given me 20 years ago, the day Malcolm moved in. And just like that, the dining room faded. The noise of the football became distant background hum, and I was pulled backwards through time to Sandhurst 14 years earlier. I was 20 years old, graduating in the upper 5% of my intake from the Royal Military Academy. The air was crisp, filled with thunderous applause of thousands of proud families. Around me, my fellow cadets were beaming, scanning the stands for their families, holding signs and waving Union flags. I was the only one staring at 2 empty metal folding chairs. I'd sent them the tickets months in advance. I'd even offered to pay for their train tickets from Surrey to Berkshire. But 2 days before the ceremony, my mother had called. Her voice was small, barely above a whisper. "I'm so incredibly sorry, Josephine. It's Malcolm. His back is playing up again. He can barely move from the sofa. You could come alone, Mum. It's my graduation. I'm becoming an officer." "Oh, darling, you know I can't leave him when he's suffering. Who would look after him?" In spirit. Those 2 words crystallized something inside me that day. Malcolm didn't have back pain. He had a bruised ego and an inability to handle attention being directed away from himself. He'd anchored my mother to that house, and she'd let him, standing there in my dress uniform, tossing my cap into the air amidst cheering families. I'd never felt more utterly alone. The sound of silverware clinking against china brought me back to the present. I looked around the table. Everything Malcolm bragged about, the house, the investments, the lifestyle, was a complete lie. 4 years ago, Malcolm had gambled away their savings on penny stocks he insisted were guaranteed. The foreclosure notice had been taped to the front door one gray morning. My mother had called me, absolutely hysterical, begging for help, whilst terrified Malcolm would discover she'd asked. I'd stepped in. I'd set up automatic transfers. For the past 4 years, a substantial portion of my military salary had been routing directly into keeping a roof over their heads, into keeping this house. And how had Malcolm repaid that? You know? The problem with the neighbors, Malcolm was saying, spraying fragments of stuffing across the tablecloth, is that they lack genuine financial intelligence. I told Jeffrey next door, "You've got to understand when to buy and when to hold. That's the secret to the good life." Isn't that right, Maggie? My mother, the woman whose mortgage I was paying in absolute secrecy, looked down at her plate and nodded. "That's absolutely right, Malcolm. You've always had a brilliant head for business." Bile rose in my throat. She was rewriting reality. She was erasing my sacrifice to build his pedestal. I wasn't just invisible. I was the fuel they burned to keep their delusional world warm. Speaking of the good life, Malcolm continued, pivoting to his favorite subject, his glorious military service, which had amounted to less than 2 years before he received an administrative discharge. He took a long swig of his beer. I was telling the lads down at the pub the military these days? It's an absolute joke. It's become a daycare center. Back when I was serving, we were proper tough. None of this timeout nonsense or sensitivity training. We got the job done. Now it's all progressive politics and diversity seminars. I bet you spend half your time in those, don't you, Josephine? The irony was sharp enough to cut Diamond. Malcolm had served 18 months as a kitchen orderly before receiving discharge for insubordination. He'd peeled potatoes and scrubbed grease traps. Meanwhile, I was managing Trident submarine deployments across the Pacific Theater, dealing with nuclear deterrence, responsible for thousands of personnel. It's a different landscape now, Malcolm, I said evenly, keeping my voice completely empty of emotion. The threats have evolved. Cyber warfare, satellite defense systems. Excuses, Malcolm slammed his hand on the table again. That's your problem. Too much thinking, not enough decisive action. What the military needs are people willing to make hard choices. If I was directing the Ministry of Defense, I'd sort it all out within a week. I'm certain you would, I murmured, stabbing at the turkey. My mother chimed in immediately, desperate to redirect his attention. Malcolm always says the country is heading in the wrong direction. He's tremendously knowledgeable about history. Josephine, perhaps you should listen to him. I froze completely. My own mother was suggesting I take military advice from a man whose tactical experience extended no further than deciding salt levels for mashed potatoes. It wasn't anger anymore. It was hollow, profound exhaustion. I understood then that I wasn't sitting at a family dinner. I was participating in a theatrical production where everyone possessed a script except me. Malcolm was the hero. My mother was the adoring audience, and I was the prop. The silent, disappointing daughter they could project all their insecurities onto. I looked down at my hands resting in my lap. Beneath the napkin, my fingers brushed the cold, rubberized case of the secure phone. I was commanding 50,000 personnel across an entire theater. I had the personal trust of the Prime Minister. I possessed the authority to level entire cities with a single authorization code. But I couldn't convince my mother to stand up for herself. That was the single war I'd lost repeatedly for 35 years. The phone vibrated again. 2 distinct patterns. The second alert. My time was running critically short. A sudden sensation pulled me back from the edge of despair. It wasn't a sound, it was a feeling. A vibration. Against my thigh, the red phone buzzed with increasing urgency. Buzz, 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 buzz. The DEFCON 3 alert pattern. My heart stopped beating for a full second. The world beyond this dining room, the real world, the dangerous world was reaching out. Whilst Malcolm complained about cranberry sauce, something genuinely catastrophic was unfolding on the opposite side of the globe. I gripped the phone beneath the napkin, my knuckles turning white. Above the table, I was a failure. Below the table, I was the only thing standing between global peace and nuclear catastrophe. "What's wrong with you?" Malcolm barked, noticing my sudden rigidity. "You look absolutely ghastly. Stop fidgeting. It's tremendously distracting." The vibration against my thigh wasn't merely a notification. It was a scream encoded in Morse code. SOS. In my world, it means a strategic asset has been compromised. My heart shifted into combat rhythm. My sympathetic nervous system flooded my body with cortisol, sharpening my vision and dulling the ambient noise around me. But I couldn't run to a situation room. I was trapped in a suburban dining chair, flanked by a mother terrified of her own shadow and a stepfather currently critiquing turkey gravy. "Carol, I've got to be completely honest with you," Malcolm said, his mouth still full. He held up a spoonful of gravy, letting it drip back onto his plate pathetically. "This gravy, it's watery. It's got absolutely no body whatsoever." My mother flinched as though he'd physically struck her. I used the drippings, Malcolm. Perhaps I didn't let it thicken sufficiently." "I'm terribly sorry." "No, forget it," Malcolm grunted, wiping grease from his chin. "I'll just suffer through it, like I suffer through absolutely everything in this house." Whilst he played the martyr, I carefully peeled back the corner of the napkin on my lap. The phone's screen glowed with an ominous red light. The message scrolling rapidly was terrifyingly brief. "Alert. Scottish territorial waters, North Sea sector. Unidentified submersible detected. Acoustic signature match. Severance-class vessel. 12 nautical miles off Caithness coast. My blood turned to ice. A Russian nuclear-powered cruise missile submarine was skimming the edge of British territorial waters. This wasn't a drill. This was a provocation. And another thing, Malcolm continued, pointing his fork at the television. Look at that midfielder. Completely overrated. I tuned him out completely. My thumb flew across the biometric scanner embedded in the bottom of the phone. Access granted. I needed to act immediately. I was the senior watch officer for this operational period. The Ministry of Defense was awaiting my authorization to escalate response protocols. If that submarine breached the 12 nautical mile limit, they could launch cruise missiles that would impact London in less than 18 minutes. I typed in the authorization code for a priority override command. Alpha Zulu 902. I accessed the deployment grid for RAF Lossiemouth. I highlighted the squadron of P-8 Poseidon Maritime Patrol aircraft positioned on the airfield. These were submarine hunters equipped with torpedoes, depth charges, and sophisticated sonar systems. I authorized deployment, intercept vector, rules of engagement, shadow and monitor. I activated the command sequence. A bead of sweat trickled down my temple. It wasn't the heat of the kitchen, it was the crushing weight of command responsibility. I'd just scrambled £500 million worth of military hardware whilst eating dry turkey. If I was wrong, if that was merely a whale or a malfunction in the hydrophone array, my career evaporated instantly. If I was correct and I did nothing, millions could perish. Josephine. Malcolm's voice cracked like a whip, shattering my concentration. I jumped, my knee connecting with the table's underside. The water glasses rattled. I quickly slid the phone deeper between my thighs, covering it with the napkin. I am terribly sorry. What? I stammered, looking up. My pulse was thundering in my ears. Malcolm was staring at me intently. His eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. He'd stopped chewing. A piece of turkey skin hung from his lip. I asked whether you wanted a bread roll, he said, his voice dropping to a low, threatening register. But you wouldn't know that. Would you? Because you're too busy playing pocket pool under the table like some sort of teenager. The table went absolutely silent. My mother gasped softly. Grandpa Arthur stopped his tremors for a brief moment, his eyes locking directly onto mine with shocking clarity. I'm not playing games, Malcolm, I said, my voice tighter than intended. I told you, it's work, important work. Work? Malcolm scoffed, leaning back in his chair. The wood groaned. You're 35 years old. You don't have work. That requires texting beneath the dinner table on Christmas. I think you're texting some bloke. He looked around the table seeking validation. That's it, isn't it? Some loser you met on the internet. Probably someone who still lives with his mother, exactly like you live with me. It's not a man, Malcolm, I said through gritted teeth. The status bar on my hidden phone turned green. Assets airborne. Estimated time to target location. 12 minutes. I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The P-8 aircraft were in the air. The Scottish coast was becoming secure. I'd executed my duty. I simply needed to survive dessert. Don't lie to me, he spat. The jovial bully vanished, replaced by the angry drunk. He pointed the knife directly at me. I have one rule in this house, no secrets. Absolutely no disrespect. You think you're better than us? You think you're too sophisticated to engage in genuine conversation with your family because you're messaging some random man on a dating application? Malcolm, please, my mother whispered desperately. Simply let her be. No, Maggie, you mollycoddle her. Malcolm slammed his hand down again, harder this time. She sits here consuming my food, drinking my beer, using my electricity, and she can't even make basic eye contact. She's concealing something. He stood abruptly. The chair scraped violently against the hardwood. He loomed over the table, a towering mass of insecurity and cheap aftershave. Show me the phone, he demanded flatly. I froze completely. No, I said. Excuse me? Malcolm's face transformed into a shade of purple that matched the cranberry sauce. I said no, I repeated, my hand clamping down protectively on the device beneath the napkin. It's private, and it's absolutely none of your concern. My house, my business, Malcolm growled. He began walking around the table toward me. Heavy footsteps. Thud. Thud, thud. You're living beneath my roof. You follow my rules. Now give me the bloody phone, Josephine. I want to know who's so critically important that you have to ignore your own mother on Christmas Day. I calculated the distance rapidly. He was approximately 6 feet away, closing in. On the screen beneath my hand, a new notification appeared. Confirmation requested. DEFCON status elevation required. I couldn't hand him the phone. If he saw the classified markings, if he discovered the nuclear launch protocols, that constituted a federal crime. But more critically, if he seized the device, if he severed the secure connection, the Ministry of Defense would lose contact with their senior watch officer during an active intercept. Malcolm, stop, I warned, my voice dropping an octave, slipping into my command voice. Do not approach me any further. He paused, momentarily surprised by the authoritative tone. Then he smirked. Or what? You're going to cry? You're going to run upstairs to your bedroom? He lunged forward. The sound of shattering glass sliced through the tension like a guillotine blade. Malcolm's hand, inches from my wrist, jerked back as a spray of ice water exploded across the table violently. Bloody hell, Malcolm yelled, jumping up. He swiped frantically at his chinos where a dark, wet patch was spreading across his groin. That was absolutely freezing. Seriously? All eyes turned to the far end of the table. My grandfather Arthur sat frozen in his wheelchair, his right hand trembling violently. That same hand had once gripped an M1 Garand rifle in the Pacific Theater. A heavy crystal tumbler lay on its side in a spreading pool of water and melting ice cubes, its contents dripping onto the carpet. Aye, Grandpa Arthur stammered, his lower lip quivering with humiliation rather than fear. A body no longer obeying his commands. I tried to. The condensation, for God's sake, Malcolm roared, grabbing handfuls of paper napkins and scrubbing aggressively at his trousers. Look at this mess. This is precisely why I insisted he needed a sippy cup, Maggie. But no, you said it was undignified. You know what's undignified? Spilling ice water all over the floor like a toddler. Malcolm, please. It was completely accidental, my mother pleaded, rushing to blot the tablecloth. Her face flushed with secondhand humiliation. Accidental? It happens every single time. Malcolm threw the wet napkins directly onto Arthur's plate. He's a liability, Maggie. A drooling, shaking liability. The military veterans' home is far too good for this one. He belongs in a nursery with proper supervision. The rage that had been simmering in my gut turned suddenly cold and crystalline hard. I didn't look at Malcolm. I didn't acknowledge his tantrum. In one fluid motion, I slid the secure smartphone from my lap into the deep pocket of my oversized cardigan, securing it tightly. Then I stood up with complete composure. I walked past Malcolm, absolutely ignoring his muttering about dry cleaning expenses, and knelt beside my grandfather's wheelchair carefully. It's absolutely fine, Grandpa, I said softly. My voice wasn't the high-pitched baby talk people often reserve for elderly relatives. It was low, steady, and commanded immediate calm. I picked up the fallen glass and set it carefully aside. I took one of the fancy linen napkins and began to gently dry Arthur's trembling hand. His skin was paper-thin, decorated with age spots and prominent blue veins, shaking with advanced Parkinson's disease. Most people pull away from that shaking. It makes them profoundly uncomfortable. It reminds them of mortality. But I held his hand firmly, matching his tremor with my own stability, grounding him completely. I dried his fingers with the same precision I would use to inspect a weapon or calibrate a targeting system. Efficient, respectful, dignified. I'm terribly sorry, Josephine, Arthur whispered, his watery blue eyes looking at me with a clarity that belied his physical frailty. I simply wanted a sip of water. I know, I replied, folding the napkin neatly. Accidents happen in military operations. We clean up and we progress forward. Yeah, the field, Malcolm scoffed from above us. Listen to her. You two are perfect for each other. The invalid and the failure. Perhaps you should be the one changing his nappies, Josephine. I stiffened, ready to finally snap. But then Arthur's grip tightened on my hand. For a man who struggled to maintain hold of a water glass, his grip was surprisingly powerful. It was the grip of a soldier who had held the line at Guadalcanal. He pulled me closer, forcing me to lean in until my ear was nearly touching his lips. "Gan him," Arthur wheezed, his voice barely audible over the football commentary returning to the television. "He doesn't understand anything of importance." "Doesn't understand what, Grandpa?" I whispered back. Arthur turned his head slightly. His eyes, usually clouded with age, were suddenly sharp and clear, piercing directly through the facade I'd constructed so meticulously. "I saw inside your bag, Josephine," he murmured quietly. "When you arrived, you left the zip open." My breath caught in my throat. My handbag contained my backup credentials and my dress uniform cap, which I'd hastily shoved inside after changing clothes in the car. "I saw the insignia," Arthur continued, a small, proud smile touching his trembling lips, 3 silver stars, and the nuclear authorization codes. "I know precisely what that red phone represents." I stared at him, completely stunned. I'd invested years concealing my rank, my achievements, and my burden from this family to avoid their jealousy. But Arthur had observed everything. He'd truly seen. "You're a lieutenant general," he whispered, the words rolling off his tongue with unmistakable reverence. "You're commanding the entire strategic theater, aren't you, Grandpa?" I started to protest, but he silenced me with a squeeze. "You don't need to explain anything to me," Arthur said quietly. "I understand precisely why you maintain your silence. The lion doesn't require a roar to prove its status to a collection of hyenas." Tears pricked the corners of my eyes. In this house, where I was treated like a parasite, the oldest, most physically broken man in the room was the only one who truly comprehended the truth. He didn't simply see a granddaughter. He saw a commander. "A soldier, you're carrying the burden of the world in that pocket?" "Madam General," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "Don't permit a man who peeled potatoes for a living to dictate how you should conduct yourself." A wave of warmth crashed over me, washing away the icy humiliation of the previous hour. I wasn't alone at this table anymore. I had someone watching my back. "Thank you, Grandpa," I choked out. "Hey." Malcolm banged on the table again, shattering the moment. "Are you two finished whispering secrets? It's precisely like living in a care facility." "Arthur, stop bothering her and consume your stuffing before you spill that as well." He laughed at his own joke, looking around for approval. He's completely lost it, you know. He genuinely thinks he's still serving, probably telling her about how he single-handedly won the entire war. Absolutely pathetic. I stood up slowly, releasing Arthur's hand but carrying his strength with me. I turned to face Malcolm directly. I didn't look down. I stood at my full height, my shoulders squared back, my chin elevated, the posture of someone who walks the corridors of the Ministry of Defense with absolute authority. "He has more dignity in his little finger than you possess in your entire body, Malcolm," I said. My voice was calm, terrifyingly so. Malcolm's smile faltered. He blinked, confused by the sudden shift in my demeanor. "Excuse me, what did you just say to me?" That's when the sound erupted through the room. A shrill, mechanical digital trill. The kind of ringtone hard-coded into secure government devices for one reason only. Immediate action required. It was coming from my pocket. The room went completely silent. Malcolm's eyes dropped to the pocket of my cardigan, where the red light was flashing visibly through the knit fabric, pulsing with the screaming ringtone. "I told you," Malcolm whispered, his face twisting into a mask of pure fury. "No electronics. Absolutely no exceptions." He didn't comprehend it yet, but the person calling on that phone possessed the authority to reduce this entire house to rubble, and I absolutely had to answer. "I have to accept this call," I said, my hand moving toward my pocket. "The hell you do," Malcolm spat, stepping forward, his eyes locking onto mine with clear intent to harm. "Give me that phone." Right now the digital trill continued relentlessly. "Dur ring. Dur ring." Every second that passed was another second the Prime Minister was being kept waiting. During a potential nuclear crisis, this constituted a court-martial level offense. "Career-ending Malcolm, move," I said, my voice dropping into command register. I wasn't the stepdaughter anymore. "You are actively obstructing an official communication in violation of the Official Secrets Act." Malcolm blinked, momentarily stunned by the absolute authority in my tone. Then his face twisted into a sneer. Federal communication, he mocked, stepping closer. He reeked of Guinness, turkey grease, and old perspiration. Listen to you. You think because you watch crime dramas, you can address me that way. You think you're important? He jabbed a finger into my shoulder. It hurt sharply, but I refused to flinch. You're a 35-year-old woman living in her childhood bedroom. You don't have federal communications. You have delusions. Spittle landed on my cheek. Who is calling you? Is this a debt collection agency? Did you invent that boyfriend? It's the Prime Minister, I said. The truth slipped out before I could stop it. The room went absolutely silent. My aunt's fork paused halfway to her mouth. My mother looked at me with wide, terrified eyes, clearly believing I'd experienced a complete mental breakdown. Then Malcolm exploded with laughter. The Prime Minister, he howled, slapping his thigh. Did everyone hear that? She claims it's the Prime Minister. Oh, this is absolutely brilliant. Hey, Artie, your granddaughter has gone completely mad. She thinks the PM is personally calling her for Christmas recipe advice. He turned back to me, his smile evaporating instantly, replaced by a cold, predatory glare. You think I'm stupid, don't you, Josephine? You think you can fabricate lies to my face? It's probably a telemarketer. Or worse, you're selling something, aren't you? Insurance policies. It is a matter of national security, I said, enunciating each word clearly. The phone in my hand vibrated with increasing urgency. The protocol was explicit. If I didn't answer within 60 seconds, the Secret Service would initiate a remote wipe and dispatch a containment team to my GPS coordinates. We were approaching 45 seconds. National security, Malcolm repeated, shaking his head. You are absolutely pathetic. You're so desperate to feel special that you've constructed this elaborate fantasy world. Well, reality check. He advanced another step. He was inside my personal space now, looming over me. I'm going to teach you a proper lesson about respect, Malcolm said, extending his hand. Give me the phone. I'm going to activate the speaker function. I want everyone to hear this Prime Minister of yours. I doubt he sounds like anyone important. Probably some bloke from a call center trying to sell us an extended vehicle warranty. Malcolm, do not touch this phone, I warned. My hand moved instinctively to my hip, pure muscle memory, reaching for a sidearm that wasn't physically present. If you interfere with this call, you are committing a serious felony under the Official Secrets Act. I am warning you clearly. You're warning me, Rick's eyes bulged. The vein in his neck pulsed visibly. You ungrateful little brat. I've clothed you. I've kept the heating on, and you threaten me. Maggie, Malcolm shouted without breaking eye contact. Tell your daughter to surrender the phone immediately before I throw her out onto the street. Josephine, just give it to him. My mother cried out, tears streaming down her face. Please, simply let him see it. Why must you always be so difficult? Just apologize and give him the phone. Her betrayal hit me like a physical blow. She would genuinely prefer to witness my complete humiliation. She would rather risk my career and the security of the entire nation than observe Rick becoming upset. I can't do that, Mum, I whispered. My eyes locked on Malcolm. Time's up, Malcolm growled. He lunged forward. It wasn't a calculated military strike. It was a clumsy, heavily inebriated grab. But he was genuinely heavy, and we were confined in a tight space. He grabbed my wrist, the one holding the nuclear authorization device, his grip absolutely crushing. His fingernails dug into my flesh, drawing blood. Let go, I shouted, struggling to keep the device secure. Give it to me, Malcolm yelled, twisting my arm viciously. I'm going to expose you for the liar you are. The phone was still ringing. But as we wrestled over it, the countdown timer on the screen reached 0. The automated security bypass engaged. The call connected independently. Malcolm didn't comprehend what was occurring. He simply witnessed the screen change. In his drunken triumph, he wrenched the phone from my hand, holding it aloft like a trophy. Got it, he announced, breathing heavily. He looked at the phone, his thumb hovering over the screen. He observed the active call timer ticking upward. Now, Malcolm sneered. Let's discover who this truly is. He pressed the speakerphone button, a brief pause. Then a voice. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. It was calm. It was deep. It was the unmistakable resonant baritone that every British citizen had heard on evening news broadcasts, in Parliament, and during times of national crisis. It carried the weight of Westminster, the authority of the Constitution, and the absolute power of the entire British armed forces. "This is the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom." Malcolm froze completely, his mouth open to deliver another insult, then hung there slack. The color drained from his face so rapidly, the red flush of alcohol evaporated, replaced by a sickly pale gray. "I what?" Malcolm stammered, his voice suddenly tiny. I asked. The voice on the phone repeated, icy and sharp as a knife, "Who I am communicating with. You are currently holding a secure nuclear command device assigned to Lieutenant General Josephine Whitmore. Identify yourself immediately." Malcolm stared at the phone. Then he stared at me. His eyes had widened, filled with primal animalistic terror. The arrogance was completely gone. The bully had vanished. All that remained was a man comprehending that he was standing directly on the railway tracks, and the train was already visible. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, a physical weight that pressed down on the dining room table. For 2 agonizing seconds, the only sound was faint, rhythmic static. The sound of an encrypted satellite connection spanning thousands of kilometers. Malcolm stood there, his chest puffed out, his face a mask of drunk bravado. He looked around at the guests as though to say, "See, I called their bluff." He was genuinely anticipating a dial tone. Instead, a voice filled the entire room again. "This is the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. I am currently speaking with the individual who has just intercepted a priority level 1 communication on a secure government line." The tone was not angry. It was considerably worse. It was cold, detached bureaucratic steel. "Identify yourself immediately." Malcolm blinked rapidly. His brain, absolutely saturated with cheap beer and decades of unearned confidence, was misfiring. He looked at the phone as though it had metamorphosed into a live cobra. Malcolm stammered. The booming baritone was gone, replaced by a high-pitched squeak. "I? Who is this genuinely? Is this a radio station? Is this a prank television program?" He looked directly at me, desperation clawing at his eyes. "Josephine, is this your associates playing some sort of joke? Tell them to stop. This isn't amusing." I didn't move. I didn't speak. I simply observed. I watched the blood drain from his face. I watched perspiration break out on his upper lip. Tiny beads of pure terror accumulating instantly. "This is absolutely not a joke, sir." The Prime Minister's voice cut through sharply. "And I genuinely do not possess time for games. You are currently holding a device classified as top secret under the Atomic Energy Act. I will pose this question one final time. Who precisely are you?" Malcolm's hand began to shake. It commenced as a subtle vibration and rapidly escalated until the phone was wobbling perceptibly in his grip. "I'm Malcolm," he whispered. Then, recognizing how pathetic that sounded, he attempted to recover some bluster, but it crumbled before leaving his throat. I'm the property owner, Malcolm Thornton." "This constitutes my house, Mr. Thornton," the Prime Minister said, pronouncing the name with distaste that suggested Malcolm was something he'd stepped in deliberately. "Why precisely are you in possession of Lieutenant General Whitmore's secure communications device?" The room gasped, a collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen completely out of the atmosphere. Lieutenant General Whitmore. My mother's hands flew to her mouth. Her eyes widened in absolute shock. She looked at her failure of a daughter, the one she'd apologized for, the one she'd pitied, and attempted to reconcile that image with the title the leader of the nation had just utilized. General. Not Josephine. General. Malcolm looked absolutely punched in the stomach. He stared at the phone, then at me, then back at the phone. The cognitive dissonance was visibly tearing him to pieces. "General?" Malcolm choked out, a nervous, hysterical laugh bubbling up. No, Mr. Prime Minister, sir, you've made a genuine error. This is Josephine, my stepdaughter. She's unemployed. She plays video games. She's merely Josephine. Mr. Thornton." The Prime Minister interrupted, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerously quiet. "You are completely mistaken. The officer currently standing in your kitchen is the Deputy Director of Strategic Operations commanding the Pacific Theater. She is actively coordinating an operational response to hostile foreign incursion. And you? The pause was absolutely excruciating. You have just severed her communication link to the Ministry of Defense during an active crisis situation. Do you possess any comprehension of what you have genuinely accomplished? Malcolm's knees actually buckled. He required the table edge to prevent complete collapse. Perspiration streamed down his face, dripping onto his polo shirt. I didn't recognize, Malcolm whimpered. She didn't inform me. She simply stated it was work. I genuinely believed she was fabricating the entire situation. Ignorance does not constitute a legitimate defense for treason, Mr. Thornton, the Prime Minister stated. The word seemed to hang indefinitely in the atmosphere. Treason. No, wait, Malcolm stuttered, his face transforming into a shade of gray I didn't recognize. I'm a patriot. I genuinely served. I was in a military kitchen at Aldershot. I absolutely adore this nation. Then you should have respected its uniform, the Prime Minister retorted coldly. Under the Official Secrets Act, interfering with a nuclear command and control asset carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 20 years in federal prison. Obstructing a high-ranking officer during a state of emergency constitutes an act of domestic terrorism according to our legislation. Oh God, my mother wailed softly, burying her face in her hands. Malcolm looked directly at me, his eyes begging, absolutely wet with tears of pure terror. Josephine, tell him. Inform him I didn't intend any harm. Inform him we were simply joking around, we're family. Family jokes amongst loved ones. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had called me useless merely 5 minutes previously. The man who had made my mother cry repeatedly throughout decades. The man who had absolutely risked millions of lives because his ego couldn't process a woman possessing a secret. I didn't say a single word. I simply raised an eyebrow slightly. The time for conversation has ended, Mr. Thornton, the Prime Minister said. We tracked the GPS signal of the device immediately upon unauthorized contact. You have wasted sufficient of my time, and you have endangered sufficient British lives throughout this evening. Malcolm was shaking so intensely that the phone slipped from his perspiring palm. He clutched it desperately with both trembling hands, absolutely terrified of dropping it, yet simultaneously terrified to maintain holding it. Please, Malcolm begged, addressing the speakerphone. I'm genuinely sorry. I'll surrender it. I'll give it back immediately. Simply don't arrest me. It is far too late for that, the Prime Minister said. The voice was completely final. Absolute. Mr. Thornton, do me one favor. Absolutely anything, Malcolm cried out. Anything, sir. Look directly out your window. Malcolm froze completely. He gradually turned his head toward the large bay window that overlooked the front driveway. The driveway he'd remained so proud of, where he parked his expensive pickup truck. He took a jerky, robotic step toward the glass. I don't observe, Malcolm started. Then the entire world outside exploded into light. Malcolm never witnessed his prized Ford pickup. He never laid eyes on the manicured lawn he'd spent every Saturday obsessing over. What he observed was a wall of absolutely blinding, totally impossible white light. It struck the bay window with tremendous force, transforming the night instantly into a hyper-exposed glare. Simultaneously, the air directly above the house commenced to vibrate. It was a rhythmic, chest-compressing thumping that rattled the finest china in the hutch. Thup, thup, thup. Helicopters. Low altitude hovering directly above the roofline. What the? Malcolm started, shielding his eyes. He didn't get to complete the sentence. Crash. The bay window didn't merely break, it absolutely disintegrated. Controlled detonation charges blew the glass inward in a spectacular shower of glittering shards. Before the initial piece of glass contacted the floor, 3 metallic canisters clattered across the hardwood. Bang! 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 Flashbangs. A searing white light and a concussive boom rocked the entire dining room. My mother screamed, a high-pitched shriek of complete terror. My aunt dove under the table. The heavy oak table itself seemed to jump. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. My training activated instantly. I recognized precisely what was occurring. I tucked my chin, opened my mouth slightly to equalize internal pressure, and remained absolutely motionless. This was a textbook breach and clear operation. Through the smoke and ringing, the lasers appeared. Dozens of them. Tiny dancing red dots swarmed across Malcolm's chest, his face, and his trembling hands. He resembled a Christmas tree illuminated in hell. Federal officers, get down. Get down right now. The commands seemed to come from everywhere simultaneously. The rear door was forcefully kicked open. The front door was violently rammed. The shattered window became a portal for shadows to flood through. Individuals in complete tactical gear, black Kevlar vests, ballistic helmets, assault rifles raised at the ready, swarmed the room. They progressed with the absolutely terrifying fluid speed of a pack of hunting wolves. These weren't local police officers. This was the close protection team, the elite unit answering directly to the Prime Minister. The sharpest tip of the operational spear, Malcolm simply stood there frozen, his brain unable to manage the transition from Christmas dinner to war zone. He was still gripping the phone, blinking stupidly at the laser sights painting his forehead. Drop the device. Drop it immediately. Malcolm attempted to communicate. I live. His response was far too slow. 2 officers struck him like a freight train simultaneously. There was no negotiation. One officer swept Malcolm's legs completely, whilst the other drove a shoulder into his midsection. Malcolm descended to the floor hard, but he didn't contact the ground. Gravity and momentum conspired to deliver the most poetic justice I'd ever witnessed. Malcolm's face crashed directly into the massive ceramic bowl of mashed potatoes positioned at the table center. Splat! The bowl exploded. Creamy, buttery potatoes detonated outward like a starch-based grenade, coating everything and covering Malcolm's head in a thick white layer of complete humiliation. Before he could even sputter, the officers dragged him off the table and slammed him forcefully onto the hardwood floor. Hands! Give me your hands immediately. Malcolm was thrashing, producing muffled noises through potatoes clogging his mouth and nasal passages. Get off. You're fracturing my arm. Stop resisting, Desipi. The sound of heavy-duty plastic zip ties cinching absolutely tight was genuine music to my ears. Malcolm's hands were wrenched forcefully behind his back. An officer pressed a knee into the small of his back, pinning him to the ground like an insect beneath glass subject secure. The officer yelled, "Device is loose." I repeat, the football is loose. The phone had skittered across the floor, landing near the buffet table. The absolute chaos within the room was complete. My mother was huddled in the corner, sobbing hysterically, clutching her pearl necklace. My aunt was praying loudly. The neighbors were lying face down on the carpet, hands over their heads, trembling. Only 2 individuals remained absolutely calm. Me and Grandpa Arthur. Arthur remained seated in his wheelchair, a napkin tucked into his collar, observing the scene with a serene, almost gleeful expression. He caught my gaze and provided me with a barely perceptible nod. "Sifi, General." His eyes communicated. The front door opened once more. The heavy tactical boots made way for polished dress shoes. A tall individual in a sharp black suit stepped inside. He wore an earpiece and the grim expression of someone who hadn't smiled since the Thatcher administration. It was Special Agent Miller, the close protection detail leader. He proceeded past my sobbing mother. He progressed past Malcolm, who was actively attempting to spit mashed potatoes whilst groaning about litigation. He advanced past the armed officers. Miller halted at the buffet table. He produced a microfiber cloth from his pocket, collected the secure smartphone with the reverence one would display toward a religious artifact, and performed a quick inspection for damage. Satisfied, he pivoted toward me. The room fell absolutely silent. Agent Miller advanced toward me, stopped precisely 3 feet away, and snapped his heels together. He didn't observe me like I was a suburban stepdaughter. He regarded me as though I represented the only individual in the entire room who mattered. He extended the phone with both hands presented formally. "General Whitmore," Miller said, his voice cutting through the noise. "The asset is secured completely. The connection remains active. The Prime Minister is awaiting your situation report." I accepted the phone. I wiped a tiny speck of potato off the screen. "Thank you, Agent Miller," I said, my voice absolutely steady. "What represents the perimeter status?" "The perimeter is absolutely locked down, ma'am," Miller replied with military precision. "Airspace remains completely cleared. We're executing a containment protocol for everyone present in this house. No one departs until you personally authorize." I nodded. Then I looked directly down. Malcolm had managed to lift his head off the floor. His face represented a mask of white potato paste, gravy residue, and blood from a split lip. One eye had swollen completely shut. He looked up at me, and for the initial time, he genuinely observed me. He'd heard the officer address me as General. He'd witnessed the respect. He'd observed the weapons, and his brain finally managed to catch up entirely. "General?" Malcolm rasped, spitting out a lump. "Josephine, what? What precisely is happening?" My mother pulled herself upward from the corner, her makeup running down her face. "Josephine, why are they addressing you like that? Tell them to stop. Tell them to release Malcolm." I disregarded her completely. I advanced toward Malcolm, my boot heels clicking ominously on the hardwood, positioning myself inches from his nose. "You genuinely wanted to comprehend what I do, Malcolm," I said, looking down at him coldly. "You wanted to understand why I remain in my room. You genuinely wanted to discover whether I was selling insurance." I leaned down just sufficiently so he could witness the absolute cold truth in my eyes. "I hunt submarines," I whispered, "and I neutralize threats. Today the threat was you." Malcolm's eyes widened in absolute horror. He commenced crying. Not the angry tears of a drunkard, but the absolutely terrified, broken sobs of a man comprehending that he'd invested years kicking a sleeping dragon. "Josephine, please," Malcolm blubbered, snot and gravy combining on his chin. "I'm genuinely sorry. I didn't intend harm. We're family. Tell them." "I'm your father, Agent Miller," I said, standing upright and pivoting away. "Yes, General. Get this rubbish out of my sight." The screaming didn't terminate when the front door closed. It simply transformed into something muffled. A pathetic rhythmic wailing that progressively faded as the team dragged Malcolm toward the waiting convoy of black SUVs parked outside. Then the heavy oak door slammed shut, sealing the noise permanently outside. The dining room represented an absolute war zone. The bay window had become a jagged maw of broken glass. The festive Christmas table was completely overturned, the turkey rolling on the floor amidst a sea of white mashed potatoes and shattered china. I remained standing in the room's center, the secure phone gripped tightly in my hand. My heart rate was progressively slowing, returning to its baseline rhythm. I remained in absolute control. The threat had been neutralized, the asset had been secured, but the genuine ambush was just commencing. "Josephine," my mother said. It wasn't a question. It represented an accusation. I pivoted to observe my mother rushing directly toward me. Her hair had become disheveled, her mascara streaming down her cheeks. "What have you genuinely accomplished?" she shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. "What have you done to us?" I stared at her, my arms hanging completely limp. "I secured a breach," I replied simply. "Mother," Rick interfered with. "I genuinely don't care about your ridiculous work," she screamed, cutting me off. She pounded her tiny fists against my chest. "You've destroyed everything. You've ruined Christmas." They apprehended him. Did you observe that? They positioned him in restraints like a common criminal. "He committed a felony, Mum," I said, my voice absolutely flat. "He physically assaulted a federal officer. He jeopardized national security. I didn't arrest him. He arrested himself the instant he touched this phone." "You could have halted them," Carol wailed, gesturing wildly at the officers by the door. "You're a general. Order them to release him. Tell them it represented a mistake. Tell them he was simply joking around." "I can't," I replied. "You won't," she corrected, her face twisting into ugliness I genuinely never witnessed. "You're performing this deliberately. You've perpetually despised him. You're performing this to humiliate him." I observed the woman who had brought me into existence. I searched for the mother who used to recite bedtime narratives. But that woman had completely vanished. In her place remained an enabler, a woman so absolutely terrified of solitude that she would select the monster over the daughter she was intended to protect. "Happiness?" I asked, a cold laugh escaping my lips. "Mum, he addresses you like a servant. He squandered your retirement funds. He bullies you consistently. Is that precisely what constitutes happiness? He absolutely loves me, she sobbed. And now, look. She pointed at the shattered window. The red and blue lights of police vehicles flashed against the trees. Neighbors were gathering on their lawns, filming the spectacle. The neighbors, Carol gasped, clutching her pearls. How can I present myself at the book club? How can I face absolutely everyone? Something within me finally snapped completely. It was the quiet, final sound of a connection being severed. For decades, I'd paid the mortgage to maintain her safe. I'd swallowed Malcolm's insults. I'd diminished myself completely, concealed my rank, and performed the role of the unsuccessful spinster simply so she wouldn't experience being overshadowed. And ultimately, her most significant concern wasn't that her husband had nearly triggered a nuclear incident. It was what the neighbors might articulate. I gently yet firmly removed her hands from my jacket. I genuinely don't care about the neighbors, Mum, I said. My voice had become ice. And genuinely, you shouldn't be concerned about the book club. You should be concerned about the mortgage. I'm finished. I'm finished being the punching bag. I'm finished being your personal bank. The automatic transfers terminate today. The mortgage payments terminate today. If you want to maintain this house, you and Malcolm can determine that yourselves. Perhaps he can settle it with money he earns producing license plates in federal prison. You can't do that, she whispered, stepping back, regarding me with absolute horror. You owe me absolutely everything. I owe you respect, I replied, and I've genuinely provided that throughout 35 years. But I don't owe you my existence, and I absolutely don't owe you my personal dignity. Josephine, please, she begged, pivoting tactics from aggression to pity. I can't perform this alone. Don't abandon me. You're not alone, Mum. You possess precisely what you selected. You selected him over me repeatedly every single time. I pivoted my back to her. It represented the hardest action I'd completed. Every instinct screamed at me to pivot back, to repair it, to apologize. But I recognized that peace in this house represented merely a lie painted across a genuine war zone. I progressed toward the door. Josephine, she screamed one final time. If you progress out that door, absolutely don't you dare return. You're absolutely dead to me. I didn't halt. But before I reached the exit, I paused. To my right, positioned amidst the wreckage of the overturned table, sat Grandpa Arthur. He hadn't moved. He remained seated in his wheelchair, his hands positioned on the armrests. The chaos hadn't contacted him. Actually, he appeared more alert, more genuinely present than he'd appeared in countless years. I progressed toward him. The Secret Service officers stepped back to permit me through. Grandpa, I said gently. Arthur gazed directly upward. His blue eyes remained absolutely clear. He regarded the wreckage of the room, then his weeping daughter, and ultimately at me. He didn't articulate a single word. He recognized the expense of command. Gradually, with tremendous and trembling exertion, Arthur elevated his right hand. He adjusted his spine as much as his age would permit, and he rendered a formal salute. It didn't represent a perfect salute, but it remained the absolutely most magnificent thing I'd ever personally observed. It represented a salute from one soldier to an additional soldier. Seer Fee Kid, his eyes communicated. I swallowed the lump forming in my throat. I snapped my heels collectively, maintained perfect attention, and rendered a crisp, deliberate hand salute in complete reciprocation. Goodbye, Grandpa, I whispered. I'll return for you. I guarantee I'll extract you from this place. He rendered a single nod, a small smile playing across his lips. I pivoted and progressed toward the gaping hole where the front door had formerly existed. The wind struck me directly in the face, frigid and remarkably clean. Agent Miller remained positioned outside, holding the door open. Your vehicle is prepared, General, he said. I progressed out onto the porch. The front lawn represented a complete circus of flashing lights. But positioned directly at the curb remained a massive black Chevrolet Suburban with diplomatic registration plates. I progressed past the neighbors who'd whispered about unmarried Josephine for decades. I mounted the rear compartment of the armored vehicle. The leather was refreshingly cool and smelled of fresh vehicle and complete safety. Agent Miller slammed the heavy door completely shut. Thud. The sound represented completion, the sound of a vault locking, the sound of a chapter concluding. Through the tinted bulletproof glass, I observed the house one final instance. I perceived my mother standing positioned in the doorway, a silhouette of absolute misery. "Drive," I commanded. 6 months after that evening, the notification on my private mobile was unmistakable. It was a voicemail transcription from a blocked contact number. "Josephine, please. It's Mum. Listen, Malcolm he's experiencing difficulty in Pentonville. The correctional institution isn't precisely like the television programs demonstrate. Honey, it's absolutely freezing. He genuinely needs money for his commissary account. Please simply call me back." The neighbors continue discussing the situation, and I'm completely isolated. We're family. I didn't complete reading the transcription. I felt absolutely nothing whatsoever. It resembled reading a climate report for a city I no longer inhabited. Malcolm presently served year 1 of a 20-year sentence. My mother inhabited the house I'd terminated payments on, likely absolutely drowning in the reality she'd personally contributed to creating. I pressed the delete command. Then I permanently blocked the number. "General Whitmore, the Prime Minister is prepared for you." I gazed upward. The young aide positioned in the Downing Street waiting room appeared nervous. I smiled at him genuinely. "Thank you," I said, standing with poise. I didn't wear an oversized cardigan today. I wore my military service uniform, the dress blues. The fabric had been tailored to absolute perfection, hugging my shoulders prominently. On my shoulder boards, 3 silver stars captured the light of the elaborate chandelier. I proceeded past the aide, my stride remaining long and deliberate. The sound of my heels on the hardwood represented rhythmic, absolute authority. Click, clack, click, clack. We traversed the narrow corridors of Downing Street, past portraits of Churchill and previous prime ministers, until we reached the substantial double doors of the Prime Minister's office. The doors opened. The afternoon sunlight was penetrating through the bulletproof glass, positioned behind the official desk, bathing the room in a golden glow. Positioned there, awaiting me, remained the Commander-in-Chief. He gazed upward from an operational briefing document and smiled. "General," he said, advancing around the desk with his hand extended, "it's absolutely wonderful to witness you under considerably quieter circumstances." "Mr. Prime Minister," I replied, shaking his hand with firmness. He gestured toward the room's center, where a small gathering of photographers and the Defense Secretary remained awaiting. "I wanted to perform this privately as you specifically requested. No media presence, merely the official documentation." "I genuinely value that, sir," I said. The Prime Minister produced a soft laugh. He collected a velvet box from the adjoining table. "For your actions throughout Christmas Day, not merely did you successfully coordinate the interception of a hostile Severance-class submarine without a single shot being discharged, but you genuinely preserved the integrity of the nuclear command structure whilst experiencing what we might characterize as extreme domestic duress." He opened the box. Inside rested the George Cross. "Your grandfather?" the Prime Minister inquired gently as he fastened the medal to my uniform directly above my heart. "How is he managing?" "He's absolutely flourishing, sir," I said, a lump creating in my throat. "I relocated him to the military veterans' residence in London 6 weeks ago. He currently invests his days exchanging combat narratives with additional former soldiers. He ultimately has an audience that genuinely listens." "Good." The Prime Minister nodded, positioning himself back and rendering a formal salute to me. I reciprocated the salute. It remained absolutely crisp. It represented the motion of a woman who recognized precisely who she actually was. As I advanced out of Downing Street 20 minutes subsequently, the autumn air contacted my face. It remained absolutely crisp and absolutely clean, much like the air that evening I left Surrey, but absent the scent of incinerated bridges. I mounted the rear compartment of my government vehicle. "The Ministry of Defence, please." As the vehicle proceeded through central London traffic, I observed out the window at the Thames River. I contemplated the woman I'd formerly been, the 35-year-old girl who'd concealed in her bedroom. The daughter who'd apologized for her personal existence. The woman who'd permitted a bully to determine her value. I comprehended then that the silence I'd preserved throughout so many years didn't represent weakness. It represented incubation. I extracted my phone and opened the camera application. I gazed at my reflection in the display. The woman looking back possessed steel in her eyes. Eleanor Roosevelt stated, "No one can impose feelings of inferiority without your permission." Throughout years, I'd granted them my permission. But I had terminated that permission. And in accomplishing that, I hadn't simply maintained a command connection. I had preserved myself. The vehicle halted at the river entrance of the Ministry of Defense. I advanced outward, modifying my cap appropriately. The massive concrete structure, the operational center of the British military, ascended above me. To some, it represented intimidation. To me, it signified home. I proceeded through the security verification points, the guards snapping to attention as I advanced. I progressed down the extended polished corridors. Click, clack, click, clack. The sound echoed off the marble surfaces. It embodied the sound of a beast that had been confined for extensively, ultimately roaming its territory freely. I halted in front of a window observing the central courtyard. I gazed at my reflection in the glass one final instance. "Silence isn't empty," I whispered. "Silence represents where you reload." I pivoted away from the window and advanced toward the operational room. The doors opened automatically for me. The personnel positioned inside positioned themselves as I advanced. General on deck. Someone communicated. I didn't flinch. I didn't observe downward. I progressed directly to the head of the conference table. The general's shadow had completely evaporated. The general had genuinely arrived. My war is finally over. But I know for many of you, the battle for respect is still being fought in your own dining rooms. If you have ever had to cut off a toxic family member to save your own sanity, or if you're still searching for the courage to set that boundary, I want to hear your story in the comments below. You are not alone. If my victory gave you a spark of strength today, please hit that like button and subscribe to Hidden Family Infidelity and Revenge. Let's build a community where silence is no longer a weakness, but a weapon. Until next time.